Hello everyone. This video was recorded by me last week. It is about a wreck dive of the SS Thistlegorm shipwreck. And during this video I will try my best to point out as many details as possible because I felt like as if I just uploaded the clips as I usually do without commentary. Many things would be missed because the shipwreck can be in many places be dark. Light does not shine through well. You need a flashlight in to enter a shipwreck, of course. And I felt like I needed to do a voiceover this video in order to point out as many little details as possible and to make it perhaps more enjoyable to the viewer, which is you. So the shipwreck sits at around 30 meters, so that is where the bottom of the sea is, but the top of the shipwreck, where we spent most of our time, is at 20 meters. Most dive guides will allow open water divers to enter the shipwreck, or some might require the advanced certificate that many diving agencies have in order to dive inside the shipwreck. At this point, we just begin the penetration because our dive guide is an expert of this wreck. We are proceeding in a single file and the dive guide is in the front, and coincidentally there was another instructor in the back of a group which was also with us. And the first thing we should see are bikes used for military operations. As we wait for the footage of the bikes to show up, I actually would like to say very briefly that even though local dive guides allow open water / advanced open water divers to enter, I think to be prepared you should have at least the wreck diving certification or the advanced wreck diving certification to enter this particular shipwreck, because that would allow you to penetrate wrecks, and as you will see, it gets very dark in many places, and although I never saw it happen, perhaps a new diver might get very scared of this darkened environment, and I think the advanced wreck diving certification would prepare you for a wreck penetration in a full dark overhead environment. As you can see, we just passed, I think, a jeep, perhaps it was a lorry some time ago, and right next to it, on the right, there are more bikes. And what I think is very interesting is that the rubber is still looking quite new, to be honest. Some of it, at least, it's black and nothing grows on it. So perhaps back in the day and for military purposes, they had very good tires. And also this shows that pollution is very bad, and to never dump a tire in the ocean because it probably can last hundreds of years underwater and cause a lot of damage to the environment. As you can see from the video, my dive buddy in front just squeezed through two lorries, and as I peeked through the windows, which have no window on it, no glass on it, I saw some batteries, perhaps electrical cables, I'm not quite sure, but it is perhaps interesting to note that there are some cables down there used by British forces for some purpose. I'm not sure what that is. At this point, we just cleared a tide restriction, which shows why I said earlier that one should have advanced wreck diving certification before entering this shipwreck, because it gets very tight in many places. On the right, there are boots, like rubber boots, that were left there and are still quite intact. There are a few scattered around the shipwreck. And here on the bottom of this ship deck, there are other tires from lorries. Perhaps when the ship sunk, a lot of them just fell and accumulated in this specific area, because there are quite many, but not as many lorries inside. At this point, we just cleared an overhead restriction, and we are back in a open water section. As you can see, there is more natural light coming through, but that won't last long because we are going into the other side of the ship. Right here, I showed for a brief moment a part of a lorry, which has both tires still attached to the axis, I think it's called, and I think that was right above us, which makes it quite hard to spot because you have to turn upside down to see it, and it was quite surprising. Now we are back in a closed environment. Without flashlight, this would be almost completely dark. There are some other jeeps, rubber tires, and there's a lot of fish. I think these are lorries with some cargo on the back. And we were told by the dive guide that there would be rifles scattered throughout the shipwreck, but because the ship was sunk during World War II, most of them decayed and are almost impossible to recognize. But I think this is what I am recording in the video, just rifles which are barely recognizable anymore. And there is another boot on top of the truck on the left. At this point, there isn't much to note because there is simply a lot of objects which were used for something, which I guess when the ship sunk and perhaps after all these years of decay are just sitting at the bottom of the deck and are just scattered almost randomly, and it's quite hard to tell which component was and what was their purpose. And there are still, as you can see, many rubber tires, jeeps, trucks, whatever, and there are basically found all over the place, which makes it somewhat repetitive. But overall, I think the shipwreck is definitely one of the best in the world, as many would think, and I recommend everyone to come here in Egypt and check this wreck out for themselves. I think it was a very awesome experience. Now, perhaps one of the biggest disadvantages of diving in a large group are shown by me during this video, where I'm basically almost constantly having to worry about a person behind me trying to pass me because they are also recording, they see something interesting and they sprint past you, and sometimes you are stuck in place trying to hover, stay still as best as possible to avoid clashing with one of your dive buddies. And I think that is why it is important to be trained to dive inside this or any shipwreck or wreck, and to dive in a smaller group, and perhaps tone it a bit down with the recording, because many in our dive group had very had a lot of interest in getting the best footage possible, and it kinda makes it hard for the rest of the group because sometimes they just block some like the exit because they needed to record something, and it kinda makes it hard for everyone else. So if you dive inside a small environment, please be mindful of the members of your dive group and try not to obstruct them. And if you want to take a picture, perhaps be the last person on the group so you don't block anyone, and you can take as many pictures as you want. We just passed another section of the wreck that had a few jeeps, or perhaps they were lorries, some other boats, which is almost the norm for this wreck. And I think at one point there was a lionfish. The reason I stopped here for a moment and pointed my camera towards the ceiling is because in this specific point of the rack there is an air pocket, which is I think it's basically a room that sits above the second deck of a ship, and it would be large enough to allow an individual to enter this room with this huge air pocket, and perhaps you can just stick your head through and have a quick peek. I'm not an expert on the topic, but in many dive videos I was told that I learned that it is not ideal to stick a head inside a hair pocket, and especially removing the second stage, because the hair inside the hair pocket might be hypoxic. But it was still a wonderful sight, which unfortunately I did not fully capture in with my camera. Finally, I concluded this video by showing a recording from the day after the initial rack penetration of a train locomotive. Unfortunately, after all these years, only a tiny part of the locomotive still exists. Unfortunately, I forgot to record a tank which was sitting on its side, which is found next to the shipwreck as well, while this locomotive is found a few meters away from the wreck on the seabed at 30 meters. There are also mines and bombs on the shipwreck that have the date stamped of 1929, which I found to be very interesting. And Of course, if you are planning to do everything in one dive, it's probably best to bring nitrox, because the average depth might be around 20 meters, and the bottom where the locomotive is 30 meters.